What's up, everyone? Welcome back to Conflicts of Interest. This is episode 54, and I am the host, Kyle Anzalone. Before I get into the news today, just want to ask people to share the show, preferably from the YouTube channel, and everybody who's watching on YouTube to hit the subscribe and like buttons. You can also share the show from the Libertarian Institute, where I publish all my work. The show is also available as a podcast on its own podcast feed and a part of the Libertarian Institute all podcast feed, where you get other great shows like the Sky Horn Show, Free Man Beyond the Wall, Don't Tread on Anyone, and Year Zero. With that, let's get into the news. The first story I have today is bad news, and that is Julian Assange will not be given bail, which means even though the judge denied his extradition to the United States, they are going to continue to hold him in a UK jail. Julian Assange was first really facing persecution in 2010 after he had published several important leads showing war crimes, mainly from the U.S., but really humiliating the entire, Western regime change efforts in the Mideast and Afghanistan. And so Julian Assange had bogus sexual assault charges brought against him by Sweden, and was forced into the Ecuadorian embassy, where he lived for, I think, about 8 years, where he faced extradition to the United States. Now, the entire time that Julian Assange, really up until the point that the U.S. actually applied the extradition charges, they said, "Oh, this guy's only there because he's dodging the sexual assault allegations." With Julian Assange, always said that he would confront. He just wanted to guarantee that he wouldn't be extradited to the U.S. The U.S. kept saying, "Well, we're not going to extradite him. We're not going to ask to extradite him. We're not going to charge him for publishing all those documents." Well, it turns out that when it was kind of shown that the Swedish charges were nothing, and there's a great report by Nils Melzer. He's the UN Special Rapporteur on torture, and he has, like, again, a great report breaking down how those charges are all bogus, and how they've only been brought up at the exact moments when it seemed that Julian Assange was going to go a free man. So then in 2019, he was lost his asylum from Ecuador, and was drug out of that embassy in the UK and put in a UK prison. He was sentenced to, I believe, 50 or 52 weeks, either a year or just short of that, for violating his bail conditions when he first entered the Ecuadorian embassy. Of course, he never left the UK, and always said that he would be willing to, face justice for the alleged sexual assault allegations, because he felt like, he would beat those charges, but wasn't going to risk being extradited to the U.S. And Sweden had a far more lenient extradition treaty with the U.S. Than the UK does, where the UK, they'll ship, or the Sweden will ship just about anybody to the U.S. So that's kind of how Julian Assange first ended up in the UK prison. Then, right as his sentence for bail jumping was about to expire, where he would then be able to go out a free man, the U.S. Then requested his extradition. So rather than doing it at the start when the UK first had him in jail, they waited until the end, which allowed for, like, Julian Assange to sit in jail for a whole another year, while there were procedural motions, and his legal team researched the charges and all that stuff that needed to happen. During those, there's all these, like, little motion type trials that happen, and it's pretty clear, first of all, that the judge in the UK, Vanessa Bannister, didn't have any love for Julian Assange, and would prefer to see him, rot in prison forever. Didn't like him on a personal level, and was, giving him the harshest treatment possible, including in making it hard for him to even be a participant in his own trial, forcing him to sit in a bulletproof glass box in the back of the court, where he can't really hear what's going on or talk with his counsel. So, that was a big thing that goes on the first year. Then his extradition hearing starts. It goes on for, several months, although in reality there wasn't enough time for the actual substance of the case. COVID was used as an excuse to not bring important people to testify, including people who eventually are cited in the judges, saying that Julian Assange did commit crimes in the U.S. and the U.K. Now, ultimately, in her decision, she decides not to extradite Julian Assange on mental health grounds, saying that he has a depressive disorder and a autism spectrum disorder, and the way people are treated in U.S. prisons is so harsh that he will likely commit suicide. And she notes that the U.S. intelligence agencies have an axe to grind against Julian. So that really makes it clear that she doesn't feel that the UK could extradite Julian Assange to the US because he won't get justice; he'll just get death. Right? Like she makes that clear. Now, also in her ruling, there's a whole bunch of bad stuff, and I wrote that down the last part of the show about how she actually thinks he did commit crimes by UK and US law, but. I think the important thing for Monday was she rejected the extradition request. Now, that set up the U.S. to appeal, just like Assange would be able to appeal. So that's a possibility, but it should mean a lot of times in this kind of situation, the person would then be granted bail because you've decided that prison isn't the place for them. But today, just before recording the show, we found out that Julian Assange will not be getting bail and will apparently remain in jail while this appeal plays out. My concern is now that the US is going to be interested not only in trying to extradite Julian Assange, but also dragging this out as long as possible because they're going to be worried they're not going to end up getting their hands on him. And so let's say if they could drag out the appeal process for 2, 3, 4 years, maybe they could get him death penalty by just dying in prison in the UK. And so, maybe that turns into the US strategy. So that's a concern. He should get out on bail. That seems to like it would be the fair thing here. And what would typically happen if somebody was found to likely not be, he's not going to be extradited. So then why would you continue to hold him in jail? You feel like that's not the place for him, but he's remains in the Belmarsh maximum security jail, isolated by himself for most of the day, which is just a horrendous condition to have to live in. It's really, really disgusting that we subject, people to this, minus the worst, kind of terrorist types and baby murderers and stuff like that. So I think that's what I have on the Julian Assange update. It is bad news today, and while I continue to think that he did get a big victory with having his extradition to the U.S. denied, because I think once he ends up in a U.S. prison, he'll likely never get out. I think there's a chance he will get out of a UK prison. So maybe we still have some hope here that he's going to be able to get out. I'm going to be looking at Kevin Gosztola, Joanne Leon, the Around the Empire podcast, and Consortium News, antiwar.com, to bring the news on, what's the future here for Julian Assange. Can he maybe request bail at times in the future, request it with a different judge? What's going to happen here, and how are we going to get this guy out of jail? All right, the next story I have is equally bad news, I suppose, and that is the police officer that shot James Blake in the back 7 times. This was August 23rd, 2020 in Kenosha, Wisconsin. The officer's name is Rustin Shesky, and he is not going to face charges. That was an announcement from the Kenosha District Attorney. While, I'm disappointed in this decision, I'm not surprised at all. One of the reasons is that, I guess, fortunately, James Blake didn't end up dead. And so I think that takes a little bit of the political pressure to prosecute off of this. Now, I got the article up here from CNN, and if you look at the mainstream media, all the emphasis is placed on, this is a white officer and a black man. Certainly, that is a part of it, but you also have to look in, the blue versus civilian colors of this too, where cops get away with this all the time, and they get away with beating even white people to death. And in that case, CNN doesn't even emphasize the officer killing at all. They'll say like, oh, this guy died during arrest, where they'll make a big deal out of it, really try to drum up some political tensions and some real issues when it's a white officer and a black man. And so that's been the big part of the discussion in the mainstream media. I think the real focus here should be on reforming how these decisions are made. The Kenosha County District Attorney is the guy who works with the Kenosha police officers, and so it's not surprising that this guy who knows all these cops is deciding not to prosecute. I'm sure, all the cops that he knows are telling him, oh, like, Shesky's not a bad guy. He was just defending, the people who need to be defended. And, there's a lot of things that people could say, not maybe in defense of Shesky even, but against Blake. And if the, district attorney is just hearing that, then I think he's going to make the decision that he's going to make. And so, like I said, I'm not surprised by this. I think that the solution here is a system where you have people from different counties in the state, preferably not neighboring counties either, actually come in and decide whether or not to, prosecute these officers. Just again, because of the personal relationship that the officers and district attorneys typically have. There is, a movement that is really coming out of Kenosha, Wisconsin, even. Michael Bell Sr., his son, Michael Bell Jr., was murdered by Kenosha police years ago, and he's really pushed for some changes to laws that would have, again, outside counties investigate shootings of officers, because it removes the personal bias there. So, maybe that is a solution. I'm a favor of what Michael Bell is trying to do. I would be in favor of, somebody charging this Rustin Shesky guy with at very least attempted murder. Some people have said attempted manslaughter is maybe a better charge, because it doesn't seem like, he was trying to kill Blake necessarily, but just was untrained and unprincipled with his gun. And once he got scared and started shooting, he kept shooting. And, that's why you can't let cops walk around shooting everybody all the time, because they don't really know what they're doing and end up paralyzing people who don't need to be paralyzed. Blake maybe did be arrested that day, though. All right, let's move on, and I just want to take a minute to thank the sponsor of the show, Paloma Verde. Moving into the new year, people are, looking at, feeling better, doing some self-help and self-help kind of stuff. So think about using some CBD products to help you out with that. Go palomaverdestore.com. There you get products that are lab tested. You can see the results right there. You know what you're getting. They're capsules. These are medication type things. They're not these aren't the gummy worms that you get the headshot that have CBD. I first got with the CBD products, but now you get real vitamin like products that can help you out. And so think about going to palomaverdestore.com, using the promo code PEACE, and getting yourself some CBD products. One of the next things I want to talk about is a trend in the Trump administration. We're going to probably have a couple more before we get to the end of his term here, and that is federal executions. In 2020, there was the most in 120 years. They did 10 federal executions, and then I think they have 2 already done in 2021 and another 2 scheduled. including one of the only women to be executed on the federal level. And this woman has just the most traumatic history of being abused. She did commit an absolutely horrendous crime, but is also somebody who has some serious mental health issues, is on antipsychotic medication at this time. So these things are pretty horrific, to kill people like this. Especially people who were suffering and were victims themselves for years and years and years. I really don't want to go into the details in some of these cases, just because they are horrific. People have done horrific things, and have been victims of horrific crimes themselves in the past, which I think should make life sentences far more appropriate. I'm not saying that makes these people innocent, or people that you want just walking on the street. Like I definitely don't want that either. But to everybody get together in a room and kill them is fairly horrific, especially because they make it sound like these are very sanitized killings. But the people, I think the most recent execution, the guy took 26 minutes to die. The journalist there described it as like contracting and heaving, but he was unable to breathe. And so it sounds like these things could be pretty awful and pretty horrific. I Not that these people deserve great lives or anything like that. Just opposition to the death penalty, and it seems like a lot of these are being rushed to get done before Biden takes over as president, because Biden won't carry out federal executions. And then that, I think, makes the whole death penalty thing even more weird and uncomfortable, that if you could hold on for 2 more weeks, then the next president will just keep you there for life. Where if they get you in the chair and strap you in the next couple of weeks, then you're gonna die today. All right, moving on to more bad news, and that is about Biden's cabinet. Here I have an article from antiwar.com by Dave DeCamp. Biden taps architect of 2014 Ukraine coup for State Department. And Dave writes, according to a Political report, Joe Biden transitions team is expected to nominate Victoria Nuland to be Undersecretary of State for Political Affairs for the incoming administration's State Department. This is a high-ranking position in the State Department, and a high-ranking position that she was in when she orchestrated the 2014 coup. She's married to renowned neoconservative Robert Kagan, and previously held the position of Assistant Secretary of State for European and Eurasian Affairs. In that position, there's a famous phone call that was probably intercepted by Russian intelligence and put on YouTube between Nuland and then U.S. Ambassador to Ukraine, Jeffrey Pyatt. And in there, she says, expletive the EU. But really and that's where she caught a lot of flack, especially from the Republicans. Oh, you're assaulting our great European partners and everything like that, by using that kind of crass language. But really, the reason that the call should have been so disturbing is because in that call, she's orchestrating a coup, and she's saying that we're going to have this person take over Ukraine. So that policy not only is, a violation of all kinds of sovereignty, and is, extremely disturbing that somebody would be of the mind that, we could just go in and overthrow a government. But the real problem is that just because the government that was in place in Ukraine was pro-Russian, it doesn't mean that the coup government is going to be better. And the problem with the coup government is it had major neo-Nazi elements in it, and it actually absorbed neo-Nazi militias like the Azov Battalion into its national security defense. It kicked off a civil war in Ukraine, where there's an eastern region called the Donbass. 13,000 people have died there. And while the Donbass, the people of the Donbass have looked to be reabsorbed into the Russian homeland, Russia has decided just support their efforts, where the U.S. has decided, and under Trump, with lethal aid, including Javelin anti-tank missiles, to support the Ukrainian government, even though it has those neo-Nazi elements in it. The other thing that happened as a result of the U.S. coup in Ukraine was that Russia decided to annex the Crimean Peninsula. While it did this prior to a vote from the people of Crimea, after the annexation happened, there was a referendum, and outside election monitors, including those from Germany, certified that, well over a majority, I think close to 80% of the people of Crimea were supportive of the decision to be re-annexed and absorbed into Russia. Historically, the Crimean Peninsula is Russian territory and contained a important Russian naval base at Sevastopol that the U.S. and other NATO countries were discussing kicking Russia out of after Ukraine joined NATO, which was, the overall plan, something that Russia has drawn a red line on. So, that's kind of the things that this Victoria Nuland lady thinks that she could go around the world planning, is a coup in Ukraine to get that country to join NATO, when that could very well kick off a nuclear war between the U.S. and Russia. But she's willing to gamble with that. She also worked in the Bush administration. She was, I believe, a spokesperson for the State Department, or maybe that was her first position in the Obama government. She worked in the Bush administration as U.S. ambassador to NATO, and then since leaving after the Obama administration ends, she leaves government and she works for the Brookings Institution, the Albright Stonebridge Group, and a board member of the National Endowment for Democracy. And so it's kind of all the deep swamp institutions in DC that this lady is very much a part of. And we have more bad news about the incoming Biden administration, and that is Brett McGurk, who served as envoy for the global coalition against ISIS under Trump before Trump announced that he was going to withdraw U.S. troops from Syria and McGurk resigned, will be joining the Biden administration as Middle East and Africa director at the National Security Council. I believe this is an advisory position, so it won't require a congressional authorization. So it looks like Brett McGurk will be in the administration. Victoria Nuland, I should point out, may or may not be. It's possible that Congress would not vote to confirm her, although it seems that the results of the Senate race this morning are going to be wins for both Democratic candidates, giving them a 50-50 split in the Senate, and that would make Kamala Harris the tiebreaker there. And so, assuming that goes, along party lines on these votes, unless maybe a more progressive Democrat decides to break ranks, these very, very hawkish people are going to be infesting the Biden administration, and there's really not going to be a way to stop it. So yeah, McGurk is the person who, when Trump decided to end a war, that's when he stood up and resigned, not when Donald Trump was bombing Syria based on false flag information about chemical weapons attacks that didn't happen. Or I don't even know if it would be accurate to call it a false flag, more just a propaganda operation on that. So I think that's what I have on McGurk. This is a report that is from Vivian Salama, and she is CNN's national security correspondent. So I would assume she knows what the Biden transition team is planning. Next, this story that was something of a surprise. I didn't think that judges really blot sanctions, but here we have this story from Reuters titled U.S. Judge Blots Trump Sanctions Targeting Human Rights Lawyers War Crimes Tribunal. Here we have from Jonathan Stemple. A U.S. judge on Monday blocked the Trump administration from sanctioning human rights lawyers for supporting the World Crimes Tribunal, the International Criminal Court. The judge in Manhattan issued a preliminary injunction against the White House for imposing criminal or civil penalties against 4 law professors under an executive order from President Donald Trump last June. Trump had authorized economic and travel sanctions against the employees of the Hague-based ICC and anyone supporting its work, including a probe into whether U.S. forces committed war crimes in Afghanistan between 2003 and 2014. And that's the real rub of all of this here, is that the U.S. wasn't happy that these ICC lawyers were looking into the U.S. war crimes that had been committed in Afghanistan. Now they need, I guess there needs to be an investigation into U.S. war crimes in pretty much every country from Morocco to the Philippines since 2001, so we could really get down to this. And we really need to start fingering the people not only that committed these war crimes, but also the politicians that allowed it to happen and the elected officials who authorized, these kind of war crimes from happening. And so that, means George Bush, Dick Cheney, Condoleezza Rice, Robert Gates, Barack Obama, Hillary Clinton, John Kerry, Joe Biden, all of these people, have helped commit war crimes, have helped cover them up, and they need to be, face punishment for it. Or just like the police officers who, shoot people and get away with it, it's just going to happen more and more and more. Right, so we need to hold people responsible here. I'm not a huge fan of the ICC. There's a lot of issues with it, and so I'm not going to go through all that now. International and world court sounds horrific to a libertarian. That being said, if these people are going to carry out an investigation, especially when it's pretty unlikely that they would actually have any authority to arrest anybody or throw them in jail, but if they do an investigation into war crimes and it all comes out and they lay it all out on the table, then that's certainly a good thing for the people to be aware of, and then hopefully the American people would be interested in getting some justice done. Next story here, again from Reuters. The Treasury Department affirms recognition of Venezuela's opposition-held Congress. This headline, I picked this story because the headline was a little bit confusing, because the person who was the head of the opposition Congress, and it was that as head of the opposition Congress that he declared himself to be the rightful president of Venezuela. This man is Juan Guaido. He no longer is the leader of the opposition Congress. And so actually what the Treasury Department was doing, it was affirming that they support Juan Guaido as Venezuela's president, even though he is no longer the, they call him in the article the Venezuelan opposition leader, the leader of the opposition Congress. That isn't true. He no longer holds that position and was never an opposition leader. In fact, when he declared himself to be president in Venezuela, he hadn't even won a major national election and was only known by a small percentage of the Venezuelan people. So the licenses or the waivers that they gave are going to allow businesses to do trade and stuff with the Juan Guaido government and with the, I guess, body of Congress in Venezuela that is held by the opposition. And so this is just a recommitment to the regime change effort in Venezuela. There have been some reports that the Biden administration would look to have more normal relations with Venezuela. Uh, but they say that that only comes with Venezuela holding certified elections. When you look at the way Venezuela holds elections and the things required to vote, it's actually far more secure sounding than the U.S. election, because all the voting machines also have the electronic ballot, but they also have the paper ballot. You have to sign your ballot. There's really no early voting. There's all these things that suggest the Venezuelan election would actually be more secure than the U.S. election. But the Biden administration says, oh, we need more election security, which really means that the Venezuelan people need to pit the winner that the U.S. wants, which isn't Maduro, which isn't likely to happen. So I think the regime change policy will stay. And in the past, Biden has been critical of Trump for not being supportive enough of the coup leader, Juan Guaido. The last story I have here, again from Reuters, more than 20 people at Mali wedding killed in airstrike. And this is a report from health workers who apparently tended to some of the wounded. More than 20 people, including children, were killed in airstrikes during a wedding ceremony in a remote desert area of central Mali on Sunday. A healthcare worker with knowledge of the attack said on Tuesday. It was not immediately clear who carried out the attacks, but a French army source told Reuters that French forces operating in Mali had carried out an airstrike in that area on Sunday and killed what they claim to be dozens of fighters from Islamist groups in that area. And so, I mean, I wouldn't be surprised if this was a French airstrike and that the French were carrying out more airstrikes in Mali recently because they've lost 5 soldiers in the past couple of weeks in that country. And those were what they claim to be from is I think Islamic militants actually took credit. Al Qaeda affiliates took credit for those attacks. And so if they thought that they were able to hit Islamic militants at a gathering, then they probably ended up bombing a wedding and killing a bunch of kids in the process. So this is, just a little example of what the war on terror looks like. And it's not always just from the U.S., but it's from allied countries like France and the UK, who also look to assert their, kind of colonial ambitions and dominance over countries that they once ruled, like Mali. All right, I think that's what I have for the show today. I have an interview scheduled for Friday, so I think that'll be a really great episode. Return guests who people were gave me great feedback on having him on, so I'm really excited to have him back on. And share the show. Conflicts of Interest is on YouTube. If you're listening there, still listening, I'm guessing you like the show, so hit the subscribe button. The more subscribers the show has, the more YouTube features I unlock, and I like to do some super chats and some Q&A shows in the future. You can check out the show at the Libertarian Institute, where I publish all my work, including my daily news roundup. Follow me on Twitter at KyleAnzalone_. You add me on Facebook. My account there is open now. And I think I have enough room to accept plenty of friends. So if you're a listener to the show, you send me a friend request on Facebook. And I will be back with another show on Friday.